to improve generally the school system.
I'm talking
but
about
I said
the
that
bottom.
that does not necessarily mean that if you don't improve positions relatively, that you're going to have any change.
you would improve
and I say
them
also
relatively.
that the higher university system has provided a kind of laboratory experiment in which crucial problems still exist because you have small numbers of people, minority people, who are able to go to Harvard, to able to go to Yale, your University of Chicago, etc. And I say that those kinds of criticisms must be confronted, because otherwise you now mislead the people that all you have to do is somehow have a kind of free market system, and people are going to be able to purchase a product which, for example, unlike in a private firm, he can deny that product to you. If I go to a corporation under the law,
excuse me.
he cannot. But at the university, he can deny admission.
We're going to have to terminate this.
Fine.
But I just want to make one more statement along your line. In every proposal I have ever made for the voucher scheme, I have said that it shall be perfectly consistent with the law, that vouchers be usable only in schools which do not discriminate with respect to race. That provision can be made just as effectively under a voucher scheme as it can under any other scheme.
Sir,
and it would be,
I did not say that it would be discriminated on the basis of race. When you go to buy a car, no one's going to ask you whether or not you have dirty clothes or whatnot. If you have effective demand,
right,
you're able to purchase a car. If you present yourself at the University of Chicago, you also must present a grade point average, which is a function of your environment and other kinds of considerations.
But that isn't the problem at the first grade.
Well,
the reason you have the problems you cite at the university
the
level,
Head Start program would deny that. I mean, there was
the reason you did not have the problems at the university level is in large part, not wholly. Of course, you're not going to solve all problems. You're not going to overnight create
life is tough,
heaven on earth. Life is tough. The problem is, how do we move in the right direction? How do we get off of this descent and turn the other way? Let's give some of the other people
let's
an
see. At the
opportunity.
age of even 4 years old, there's already deprivation which is set in. So you do have the
Maybe so.
problem also
I
in the
want to
first-
do. I
first
want to
grade.
do what
Thank
I
you.
can not to intensify that. Let's have the next question. Yes.
Dr. Friedman, my name is George Basak. I'm a lawyer, and I am committed also to the struggle for freedom of educational choice. And I agree wholeheartedly with just about everything you've said, but I feel that maybe it just doesn't go far enough. I identify the issue also as freedom of educational choice, and certainly compulsory governmental education infringes upon that freedom. And I think when we look for the justification for the infringement on the freedom, the only possible one that would make any sense would be the interest of the state in an educated citizenry. The problem, however, is that the means which have been employed to accomplish that objective seem totally foreign to its accomplishment. And the reason I feel that there is another step beyond your comments is that I would identify the failure of that system to accomplish the objective to the fact that government in education is an enterprise. While we speak in terms of competition and so forth, I think that the people who are holding the strings for the construction of schools, for the staffing of schools, and so forth, view it as their own little business.
Sure.
So that I think when we talk in terms of continuing public school systems as opposed to the interest of the state in an educated citizenry, we are in trouble. For example, as an example, let's take your voucher idea. I think that the voucher idea is a great idea, but I see no point to a voucher system for one who has no need of money from the government to educate his children. If we consider, for example, a wealthy person getting a voucher, it would make no sense. Best description I heard was at a meeting of lawyers in which one lawyer said that type of voucher system, that is for everyone, would be like giving yourself a transfusion from the left arm to the right arm and you lose a gallon of blood in the process. You really don't need a voucher for the wealthy person, you just make a greater bureaucracy. I think it's the people here that need the vouchers. And I think that the voucher should be based on need. If we could establish a need factor, then we would need less bureaucracy to handle the vouchers.
On the contrary, you need the bureaucracy to determine need.
Yes, but the number of people whose vouchers would be being handled would be diminished enormously.
No, but I beg your pardon, I don't agree with it all with that view. I think that everybody in this, every man at the moment, whatever his wealth, is under our present laws. Whether he should be or not is another question, but under our present laws, he is entitled to send his child to a public school. Your argument, if it made sense, your argument would imply that public schools should be available without tuition charge,
No, I say-
only on demonstrated need.
No.
Now, every parent, regardless of his income, is now entitled to send his child to a public school. If he chooses not to send his child to the public school, he is saving the community money. He is paying his share of the taxes. And I think it is very important to separate out this question of taxes. If you think that the taxes on the wealthy aren't high enough, then propose higher taxes. But let's not get that mixed up with the problem of education. On the question of compulsion, I have a great deal of sympathy with the view you've expressed. But I like to separate issues. I want to take up one thing at a time. It's hard enough to try to make this one modification. If we succeed in making this one modification, then I will welcome you to join with me perhaps in going further. Because I think that there is a very, on a purely intellectual level, I have very great difficulty with the concept of compulsory schooling. But at the moment we have compulsory schooling. And at the moment I think it is utopian to suppose that we're going to do anything very much about that. We don't have compulsory education. Don't misunderstand that. We don't have any compulsory education at all. We have compulsory schooling. Not all schooling is education. And not all education is schooling.
May I just offer this by way of rebuttal, that I think you have demonstrated in talking about the theory of bureaucratic displacement and so forth, that when the government gets into any area of enterprise which involves the individual freedom, it is inevitable that it will overtake the whole enterprise. And I think that to assume that government schooling would continue on a modified basis with this voucher system that you propose, without inevitably, again, eating up the competition because of the tremendous amount of public monies available to it, I think inevitably we'd be right back where we started.
Well, I'm afraid the evidence is not on your side. It so happens that Denmark has maintained this kind of a dual system for something like 100 years. And the free part of the Denmark system, where they have it's a small part of it, most of it is public, but there are also free, what they call free schools, which are essentially a voucher kind of school. They have maintained a stable part of the system for a long time.
I don't think they have the political
But let me only
say.
say to you, I have a good deal of sympathy with that argument too.
Yep.
But here we have a situation where we are. And our problem is how to go from where we are to where we would like to be. Vouchers would involve less bureaucracy than our present system. They would involve less government control than our present system. I don't see any way to create utopia on earth overnight. I think we've got to do it gradually and in a way which is acceptable. Yes.
Dr. Friedman, I'm Barry Farber, conservative candidate for mayor.
Boy, I'm sorry to have gotten involved in this mayoral campaign. I am not a New Yorker, and I am not a mayoral candidate. Let me make one statement to everybody. I am not a mayoral candidate.
I disagree with you sharply in only one respect. I don't think you lack the imagination for anything that you would care to fantasize. You said your imagination was not broad enough to cover what might happen if there were a voucher system. I want you to try to guess what Harlem would look like and live like 1 year after a voucher system. And the second part of the question is, you know, on paper, if you give a parent $3,000, let's say that's the cost per child, the school system breaks even. If you give him $1,500 cash, the school system's $1,500 ahead. But in theory, we know good and well that we're talking about fixed capital expenses, and if you give him $1,500, the city's out $1,500. If you give him $1, the city is out $1 in real money. Now, is there a way to keep from administering too much medicine too fast that might kill the patient? That 3-year-old girl endeared herself to us by saying to her father, what if they gave a war and nobody came? Well, what if they gave a voucher system and everybody came?
Well, in the first place, if they gave a voucher system and everybody came, personally, I would regard that as fine. But in the second place, you needn't worry about that problem. And the reason you needn't worry about that problem is because it takes time for alternatives to develop. Just as it takes time for a business to build up and develop and create. And in the same way, if you start on a voucher scheme, I think a year from now, the effect in Harlem would be very small. A year from now, you would see 12 schools around. You would see some dedicated groups of parents, mostly, who would have organized themselves into setting up voucher schools, and they would be able to use the money they got from the vouchers. I think if you look 5 years ahead, the story would be different. By that time, you would have a great many prosperous enterprises in Harlem. If you want to talk about giving opportunity for minority employment and for minority entrepreneurs, I cannot think of any industry which would be more capable of doing it than the voucher industry. So in 5 years, it would go. Now let's go to your question. What about school expenses, the city's expenses? It is true that if you made the voucher equal to the school's expenses, the school would lose on that deal for 2 reasons. First, there are some students now who go to private schools and who cost the city nothing, and they would be entitled to vouchers. That's one of the main reasons for suggesting that the voucher be about half what it is now, because that gives you that leeway. But second, the figures I gave were not capital costs, but current operating costs of the schools. In addition to that, total capital costs, including amortization and interest, are higher than I've described. Those other costs will continue, but they aren't going to be affected one way or another. If you reduce the number of pupils in the schools, you will be able to reduce the ongoing current costs. You won't be, first of all, people will say, but you've got these contracts with teachers. How are you going to, what are you going to do about them? No problem. Because they will be shifting from the city school, public schools to the voucher schools as the voucher schools emerge. So you will simultaneously be reducing the burden on the city school and increasing the amount. It was entirely precisely to meet the kind of problem you're talking about now that we wanted to have demonstration projects in Connecticut and in New Hampshire in order to try these things out. And unfortunately, I am sorry we couldn't have some trial projects.
Well, I congratulate you for your imagination, your concept, and your presentation of both.
Thank you very much. I am sorry to say we're going to have to close this off. I wish we had more time, but our time is up. Thank you very much.